Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today, on my free YouTube channel supported by my generous Patreon supporters, I am beginning a free and, I think, complete introductory course to the study of runes. Now, what is my background that qualifies me to do this? I have a PhD in Scandinavian languages, specializing in the history of the Scandinavian languages and Old Norse literature from the University of Wisconsin, and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Georgia. I taught classes like Old Norse language and the history of the Scandinavian languages at universities such as the University of California, Los Angeles, the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Colorado, Boulder for about a decade. I taught probably the closest thing to a course in runology at an English-speaking university. When I was at the University of California, Los Angeles, my history of the Scandinavian languages class was very concerned with runology. And I took one of the closest things to a runology class in the English-speaking world at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a class for PhD students at the Scandinavian department that was, I think, closed except to PhD students. This is a subject that the public is fascinated by, but that there just isn't much satisfaction for that curiosity for in the university system. A lot of academics don't want to touch runes, even people who have a good academic background in them. Partially that's because of some unpleasant associations that runes have gotten ideologically or politically, and part of it is just the sort of associations with mysticism and magic and such that are so prevalent in popular culture. People feel like if they touch the stuff, they get kind of painted with those brushes. Well, at the outset, I'll say that I am not a mystic. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe that runes are historically or prehistorically intended primarily for magic, although there are some distant secondary applications to magic, mostly by writing out magic spells. So if there are academics out there in this field who are unhappy with how I present this field, to them I say, the public is fascinated by this. You do a better job if you think there's a better job to do, but that the mistakes and infelicities in these presentations are, of course, to be blamed on me alone. Well, let's get started with our complete course in runes, part 1. One term that I'm going to use quite a bit in this course is Germanic, and we need to understand what I mean by the Germanic languages right away. The Germanic languages are a subfamily of languages within the larger Indo-European family. So English is both a Germanic language and, at a higher level, an Indo-European language, much like an elk is a member of the deer family, and then at a higher level is a member of mammals, right? So mammal or Indo-European is a higher order, and deer family or Germanic is a lower order within that higher order. The Germanic languages do not come from German. Remember that Germans don't call their language German, they call it Deutsch. It's actually named for the Germani, the Roman term for peoples to their north who spoke Germanic languages during the Roman period. So from their languages come the later Germanic languages. We have the East Germanic languages represented by Gothic. Now, I'll talk about Gothic pretty often because Gothic is well documented thanks to a translation of, well, we have a fair amount of a New Testament translation that survives. Sometimes people say Bible translation, but I think that exaggerates how much Old Testament there is that survives. This was done by a bishop named Wulfila in the 300s, working from the Greek text. Thanks to Gothic, we have long connected texts in a Germanic language from the early centuries AD, which is also when we get our earliest known runic inscriptions. Since the earliest known runic inscriptions are pretty short, Gothic gives us a closer, more detailed look at a closer related language at about the same time, sometimes a little bit later though. Then we have the West Germanic languages, which include English and German and Dutch and Frisian and other languages in this sort of continuum, right? We have Yiddish branching out from German. We have Afrikaans branching out from Dutch, etc. Of course, at the early period where we're going to be talking about, the West Germanic languages are all much closer to one another. We have Old English in England, Old Saxon on the North Sea coast of the continent, Old Frisian on the islands off of that coast, and then much more different from the others is Old High German down in the south of what is now Germany and Switzerland and Austria and parts of France. Then we have the North Germanic languages, which are represented in the medieval period by Old Norse, which usually when I refer to Old Norse, what I'm going to be talking about is the Viking Age language, so the language in Scandinavia starting at about AD 700 through the language in Scandinavia in the period of about the Black Death, so 1380 or so. The default reference point for Old Norse is classical Old Icelandic, Icelandic in the 1200s AD. This is the language of the Icelandic sagas, as well as of the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, the two books that are our main sources of Norse mythology, the myths of the gods such as Odin, Thor, and Loki. From Old Norse come the modern Scandinavian languages on the continent. We will speak of Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. Typically, I will talk about them as a group when I need to refer to them as something like the continental Scandinavian languages. And then Icelandic is a much more conservative language, close to Old Norse, but not identical to its ancestor language, but it hasn't changed as much as the languages on the continent. There's also Faroese on the Faroe Islands that occupies kind of a middle position there. The earliest inscriptions in runes in Scandinavia are actually in a much older language than Old Norse. Now, unfortunately, the word old is already taken for Old Norse, right? The language that we can only speak of starting at about AD 700. So for that earlier language, I'm going to talk about Proto-Norse. This is ancestral to Old Norse and the later Scandinavian languages. But it's as different from Old Norse, in some ways more different from Old Norse than Old Norse is from, say, modern Norwegian or Swedish. Now, all of the Germanic languages will go back to an ancestor language, Proto-Germanic, which of course also in turn goes back to Proto-Indo-European. In many ways, it looks like the runes were designed for Proto-Germanic. The sounds that are represented in the runic alphabet agree very well with what linguists reconstruct as the ancestor for English and German and the Scandinavian languages, right? And the earliest Proto-Norse inscriptions are not very far off from Proto-Germanic. But for the most part, just to be conservative in the sense that I don't want to make claims that are more outlandish than I can absolutely back up, I will typically talk about Proto-Norse for early inscriptions from Scandinavia, even if there's not much to differentiate them formally from Proto-Germanic per se. All right. That establishes a little bit about the languages that we'll be talking about. Now let's do some level setting about what I mean by rune. If you're watching this in 2023 on YouTube, I'm going to put a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost who help keep this channel going in right here. Okay, so what are runes? What is a rune? It's important to note that runes are not themselves a language, right? People often ask me to translate things into runes, but that doesn't mean anything because the runes are an alphabet. In principle, I could write any language in runes, just like you can write any language in the Roman alphabet. We routinely open up websites and see names of, say, Russian speakers or Chinese speakers rendered in the Roman alphabet, even though those names are not written by the speakers themselves in their own languages in the Roman alphabet, right? They're written in the Cyrillic alphabet for Russian or Chinese characters for Chinese. So we can use a writing system as a sort of neutral medium for representing any language. But of course, thanks to historical accidents of various kinds, different alphabets become the standard for writing one language or another. Because English, for example, was part of the medieval Catholic world, we use the Roman alphabet, originally used for Latin to write English. And because Russia was part of the Eastern Orthodox world, it uses an alphabet derived from the Greek alphabet. And in Chinese, writing developed on its own and in its own way, and then they use their own characters. But these are historical accidents. So keep in mind that runes could be used in principle to write anything. It just so happens that historically, accidentally, this is the alphabet that wound up being the first one used to write early Germanic languages. Principally Proto-Norse in the discussions that we're going to have in the first videos in this series. The term itself is a little bit mysterious. We don't know exactly why rune became the word for a letter in this alphabet. But before I get to that, let me also just emphasize that the runes are fundamentally letters in an alphabet. Runic is an alphabet just like our Roman A, B, C. Most of what you'll find online today discusses them not as an alphabet, but as magical symbols, with people claiming, for example, that the rune for the sound F, which does have a name in Proto-Norse, Proto-Germanic, we can really say Proto-Germanic for these names, Fehu, which means money or cattle. Various different mystic systems that originate in the 19th, 20th, or 21st centuries claim that, this is a magical symbol for money or for invoking money or for perhaps summoning money or cattle or something like that. These have no relation to anything written about runes or in runes in the ancient or medieval periods. So, as prevalent as the notions are that runes are magical symbols, that's really a very modern idea. They are letters in an alphabet. No less fascinating for all of that, because of course, the runes give us the earliest writing in the ancestors of familiar languages of today, like English and the Scandinavian languages and German. Okay, but how did these letters come to be called runes? This is a tough question. We do find the word itself in early inscriptions. For example, the Einang inscription from Norway has the word runo used in the singular, actually apparently to mean the entire inscription rather than a letter in it. That inscription reads, as far as we can read it, Dhagastis, part of a name that's otherwise incomplete, runo fahido. So someone like Gudhagastis or something like that says, I painted, or perhaps just wrote, a rune, a runic inscription, a message in runes. But we also see in early inscriptions in the Elder Futhark the term used in the plural to mean the letters. So the Jarlsberg stone, which I've examined in person, reads partially, Ek erilas runos waritu. I, and erilas, a term we don't understand, but apparently an honorific title, wrote runes, wrote letters. Now, at about the same time as these Elder Futhark inscriptions are being written, in Gothic, Wolfila's Bible translation uses the cognate term runa to translate three different Greek words, most often symboulion, meaning counsel, like advice, or a council, like a group of people who give advice. He also uses it to translate boule, which means plan, and mysterion, which means mystery. Now, about the same time as the Einang stone, where we see runo used to mean the runic inscription there, we see Wolfila using the word to mean nothing like writing or its product. He uses very different words for that. So that's curious. Now, in later Old Norse, again, the language of the Viking Age and of medieval Icelandic literature, it almost always occurs in the plural, runar, meaning the runic letters. It has secondary meanings, including counsels, whispers, and occasionally we see it used in the singular, actually in only one place that I know of, to mean the entire inscription. Egil Skallagrimsson, a Icelandic poet of the 900s, uses it in one poem that's recorded in a saga where he says, Ristum rune o horni. I wrote a rune on a horn, not meaning one single letter, but actually the entire inscription. In Old English, we see runa or rune in the plural, meaning letters, typically runic, but it can also actually mean Roman letters in our alphabet. Old Saxon, runa, and the Helion, the gospel harmony written in that early Germanic language, uses runa to mean council, right, a group of advisors. And then in Old High German, we see primarily runa as whisper or murmur. Of course, this is related to modern German raunen, meaning whisper or murmur. There are contenders for related words within Old Norse. We have runi, masculine, or runa, meaning companion or confidant. Those are potential relations. We also have a family of words including raun, meaning test or experience, and reyna, meaning test or try or prove, which could be related to. It's also interesting to note that in Old English, rune, which is from the same root, translates Latin arcana, right, meaning secret knowledge, a word still sometimes seen in English. So if there is really a connection with raun and roina, right, test, experience, test, try, prove, we might expect the Proto-Indo-European root, right, the root, not just the Germanic languages, but also many, many other languages in Europe and the western half of Asia, a root like reun or rune. If that is the root, then these could be cognate beyond the Germanic languages with Greek ereunau, I experiment, I research, or Old Irish rune, meaning secret, and modern Irish secret or beloved, as in the song Shula Rune, or Welsh rhin, meaning essence. But this really isn't much, right? These aren't, the word is not a prominent word in any of these early languages, and its cognates, if these are its cognates, aren't prominent, certainly not in association with writing. So we fundamentally don't know how this word that, may be related to, again, Greek words for experiment, research, Irish words for secret, comes to mean writing or a product of writing. I've wondered if the original meaning is perhaps counsel, and that since a counsel speaks in whispers, and since you can't hear what someone is whispering to someone else, just like you can't hear what someone is writing, writing is then metaphorically whispering, and that's where this comes from. But we can't be totally sure about how this semantic change happened, how rune came to mean, right, a letter or a thing written in runic letters. Anatoly Lieberman, one of the great scholars of runes, also suggests the original meaning of council, like a group of advisors. And since what's discussed by them in council is a mystery, remember that Wolfila uses the cognate to translate Greek mysterion, it's a secret, that's how we get the secret meaning. But then their counsel is revealed, and so we get a counterintuitive development from secret to reveal. And so what is written in runes is revealed to the public in writing. I respect Anatoly's work a lot. I think it's a few more steps than my, council of advisors to whispers to writing notion, but also a pretty plausible idea. So I hope in this first installment in the complete free course on runes that you have gotten an appreciation for the languages that are written in runes, how they are related to each other and to other languages in the Indo-European family, and I have links to other videos where this is discussed in more detail, as well as what runic letters are and where the word rune might come from. I'll give you some questions to use as sort of exercises at the end of this video, And for now, till next time, let me thank my Patreon supporters from the bottom of my heart for their continued support. And to everyone out there, let me wish you from beautiful Colorado all the very best.